Welcome to a little bit of work on the federal budget and federal debt per capita. So we're going to start on page 308, and our first question dealing with this beautiful graph piece here is, was there a surplus or deficit in 2014, and by how much? So you can see we are focused on 2014, which is here, and so may or may not be easy to see, but you got to notice also that we are in trillions and millions. So I know I don't have a whole lot of room on this page, but you'll see our receipts, right? That's the money we take in, is 3.021 times 10 to the 12th, and in millions, that's 3,506,089 times 10 to the 6th. Now I want to show you what I'm going to do right now, just because I want this to be a little bit easier for me. I'm going to change this second one, this one right here, to be also in 10 to the 12th. And so that means I need 6 places, right? Because 6 plus 6 would give me 12. So if I would go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, that would put it in 10 to the 12th. So if I could erase this, I'm going to have 3.506089 times 10 to the 12th. I just moved my decimal place. Well, now we can compare the numbers because our exponents are the same. So I just look at my two numbers, and hopefully it's easy to see that 3.5 is bigger than 3.02, and therefore we had more expenses, and therefore we have a deficit. So by how much? Well, if we subtract these two numbers, you will end up with 0.485089 times 10 to the 12th. And so if you move that over, let's make it a better number, like a number that you would actually read. It would be 485,089,000,000. So that would be the deficit of 2014. Huge honking number, right? And you get that by subtracting these two. Now, using the same table, is there a projected surplus or deficit for 15 and 16? So now we are estimating for 15 and 16. And you can see clearly the expenses for both columns are bigger than the receipts. So we are going to expect deficits for both years. Okay. Now to figure out how much, well, again, we're going to do a little bit of subtraction. So you either can write it all the way out, or if you want to do it in scientific notation again, this is 2015, you would take 3.758577 minus 3.176, because this is times 10 to the 12th, so it's in trillions. So your answer would be 2015, 0.582577 times 10 to the 12th. There is the deficit. And for 2016, if you would, the estimate for that, if you would subtract, you get 0.474467 times 10 to the 12th. Again, getting that by subtracting. And you could move those decimals 12 places to the right if you want to put it into standard form. That is completely up to you. Now let's get to some story problems. We're going to jump to number 4. Calculate the per capita deficit for 2010 and for 2014. So there's really two problems here. So the first thing that we have to say is 2010. What is the deficit in 2010? Well, if you go back to the table and you look at 2010, to find the deficit you have to subtract. So I'm going to just go ahead and do that for you. So here's 2010, and I am to, after you subtract, you get a deficit of 1.294079 times 10 to the 12th. And we got to put that over the population, which is 309 million, and million is times 10 to the 6th. So when I divide those, I end up with 0.0041879 times 10 to the 6th. Well, when we talk about money, we don't usually talk about them in terms of like times 10 to the 6th. So I'm going to move my decimal place 6 places, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And I get an answer of 4,000. $187.90. And that is in 2010. So now in 2014, we already calculated the deficit. That was back from problem number 1 that we did. But we found the deficit to be 4.85089 times 10 to the 11th. And I went ahead and put that in scientific notation for you. And the population here is 319 times 10 to the 6th. So you can see how we have a smaller deficit in 2014 and we have a lot more people. And that should result in a lower per capita deficit. So when we divide, I get 0.0152065 times 10 to the 5th. And when I move it over 5 places, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I end up with $1,520.60. So you can compare from 2010 to 2014 the difference in per capita deficit based off of our deficit, right? We had a smaller deficit in 2014, and therefore we have a smaller per capita deficit. Number 5, if the average Indiana citizen has an income of $34,028 in 2010 and had expenses that were proportional to the U.S., how much expense would this average citizen have? So, if you think about it, we're going to we talk about expenses, income and expenses. So when we set up our proportion, I'm going to put expenses on top and income on the bottom. And we are going to compare the government to the citizen. So this is my setup of my proportion. So the government has expenses, and I got to think about what I did here. That's a 0. I put these in the same unit, so I'm guessing these are in millions. But since they're in the same unit, I don't need any more zeros at the end. Because remember, proportions are about being consistent. Now, because we know that our average citizen has an income of $34.28, income's on the bottom. So now I go ahead and I cross multiply. And when you cross multiply and divide, you should end up with expenses of $54,386.26. So you would be spending approximately $20,000 more than what you take in, and generally that's frowned upon to really spend that much more. Okay, let's move on to number 6. What about if the average Indiana citizen with an income of $32,667 in 2006 had expenses that were proportional to the U.S. government's expenses in 2006? Okay, so now you've got to go back to that table, and I'm going to flip back. And we're going to look at 2006. Well, if I would take this decimal point and move it 6 places, that would make them both in millions. So that's what I'm going to go ahead and do. So going back to our table here, again, I'm going to put expenses on top and income on the bottom. So for the government, I've got, here's my expenses for the government. And if I move my income 6 decimals to the right, that allows me for them to both be in millions. And if they're both in millions, I'm okay. And we know that the income for the average citizen there is $32,667. So now when I cross multiply, you will see that we get an expense for this average Indiana citizen to be $36,033.45. And that's not too bad. I mean, it's still not great, but it's less than $4,000 more than what you take in. And when you compare it to that last problem that we had, where it was almost $20,000 difference, and now we have less than a $4,000 difference. So you can see in 2006 we were a lot closer than what we were in 2010 in terms of income to expense ratio. All right, some new problems, and that's kind of why we're renumbering. We're on page 310. You just worked out your budget for January. You calculate your total monthly income would be $34.50, and your total monthly expenses would be $36.80. Do you have a surplus or a deficit, and by how much? Hopefully, you recognize if your expenses are more than your income, you have a deficit. Right? That's what it means. So, by how much? Well, you would take your $36.80, subtract your $34.50, and you have a $230 deficit for the month. So you might have to get a part-time job where you work, 5-10 hours a week in order to make up for that deficit, or get a roommate. Now, number 2 builds on that. If this is your yearly deal, right, so every month is the same, we have the same deficit every month, how much deficit will you have? And I answered that first question for you. If I'm in the hole $230 every month, and there are 12 months in the year, then I'm going to be in the hole $2,760. That's the deficit for the year. And that would generally not be a good thing. You can hope for a good tax check, but that's not even, a good way to live. All right, so let's look at number 3. Tiffany estimates she will have an annual income of $34,500. She also believes her monthly expenses will average $2,300. If her predictions are accurate, at the year's end, will she have a surplus or deficit? Well, she has this much total for an income. What's her total expenses? So if we take her monthly expenses of $2,300 and multiply by 12, that will give us yearly expenses of $27,600. Well, you can see hopefully pretty clearly that the income is more. So she's going to have a surplus. Good job, Tiffany. And if you take the $34,500, subtract the $27,600, you can see the surplus is about $6,900. That's an excellent surplus, right? Throw that in the bank. You got a little bit of a savings, a little nest egg, maybe vacation. We can use a lot of things with that money. Number 4, in 2014, the fictional place of Ivystan has receipts of $1.23 trillion with expenses of $0.91 trillion. Excuse me. In 2000, it had receipts of $1.15 trillion and expenses of $1.25 trillion. Calculate the deficit or surplus in 2000 and 2014. So we're doing 2 problems here. First one is 2000. We'll do 2014 first because it's there. Receipts, expenses. They're both in trillions. Notice the receipt number is bigger. If that's bigger, that means we have a surplus. And by how much? Well, let's subtract. So if I subtract those two, I have $0.32 trillion as my surplus, which that would be a lot of money. In 2000, you can see that the receipts are 1.5, expenses are 1.25. Expenses are bigger. We have a deficit in 2000, and by how much? Well, if we subtract $0.10 trillion. And so there is that problem. Number 5 builds on that, so we're going to use that same information. If the average citizen in Ivystan in 2000 with a per capita income of $62,500 operated in the same way as the government, how much expense would this citizen have? So remember, for 2000, our expense was $1.25 trillion, our income was $1.15 trillion. And since they're both trillion, we can just leave them right like that. Now, this is an income of $62,500, so it goes on the bottom, and we have the unknown value of the expenses in the top. So you can see, I hope, that if you look at this ratio, the top number is bigger. So in this ratio, the top number should also be bigger. So our answer should be bigger than $62,500. So I cross multiply, I divide, and I should get an answer of $67,934.78. So you are you're spending a little over $5,000 more than what you're taking in. All right, page 311 starts with this table. We've got 4 countries: Russia, Sweden, Turkey, and United Kingdom. They give us the population and the debt. Before we get too far, notice that it says dollars here for these 2 countries. Just go ahead and cross those out. I don't know why they're there. So for number 6, we want to calculate the debt per capita for each country. And I'm going to walk you through at least one and then have you kind of do the rest. So I didn't leave myself any room. So to calculate Russia debt per capita, we would take the debt on top. So we would actually take 227,084,426,230 and divide it by the population of 140,590,245. And when you divide those for Russia, we should get $1,615.22. So you should hit pause right now and try the other ones. These 2 might be a little bit trickier. You got words. You're going to need to use maybe scientific notation, something like that in order to work. So I'll just throw up the answers for the other ones. If you have questions, shoot me an email and I'll explain more. But Sweden is huge at $19,721.11. Turkey, I could go for some turkey. Turkey is $5,565.46. So that's Turkey. And then the UK, I got to be 42,500. And I double checked that twice because that just seemed really large. But you know what, it is what it is. So in number 7, which of these has the small and which has the largest? Well, the smallest, the winner of that, goes to Russia because they had the 16, 15, 22. And the largest goes to the UK at 42.5, right? Debt per capita. And last problem here, number 8. In 2015, Saudi Arabia's debt was $103.9 billion with a population of 31 million. Calculate their debt per capita and explain where they fit among the group. So the debt is 103.9 billion. Remember, billion means 9. And million, 31 million, is times 10 to the 6th. So if you divide these first numbers, you get 3.3516 blah, 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 times 10 to the 3rd, because remember, subtract the exponents. Well, that's not how we talk about numbers. So if I move my decimal 1, 2, 3, I end up with $3,351.60. So they would fit kind of in the middle. Well, not directly in the middle. Russia is smaller. Turkey is slightly bigger. So it would fall between Russia and Turkey in terms of total debt per capita. And that's the end of the video.